Hello and welcome in this special edition of our new video update. Today we are going to talk about fencing and especially about how we achieve the way and form of fencing that's presented in our game. I'm not a fencer, but I knew that what's presented to us as a fencing in most Hollywood movies is a joke. So I was looking for someone who could show us the real thing. And I found Petr Nůsek, who is a master in many forms of European martial arts and who also worked as a stunt and choreographer on many famous Hollywood movies. So he should be the right person to know how the actual historical medieval fencing looked.
I now realise that I do sword fighting because fencing, knights, princesses, swords and combat are things all boys have in their DNA. Not just boys, but little girls too. But it's also partly due to Dumas's Musketeers, those four magnificent men on the wings of fantasy and the desire for self-identification too, to be able to do something that others can't. Then you get involved in it and off you go. So today there's a fencing school I've been running for decades and I ended up in the entertainment industry, which means I'm a choreographer and I do choreography for theatre, film, musicals and TV.
So the next thing we did was that we went to Peter's private medieval mansion and there he and his team showed us how the real fencing actually works. And it totally changed our mind. Because the real fencing works very differently than what you see in the movies.
You could put it another way. We started off with something that we wanted. You had some requirement, and of course the technique and all the stuff around it shifted in a way. The original demand was authentic sword fighting that was used at the time, right? And because I come from the film industry, I know what different opinions there are about what technique to use in film or theatre or musicals. Because show business people have a very different idea, which I've been dealing with, than people who are involved in the interactive sector, which this thing belongs to, or people who are trying to reenact the techniques. So we wanted to make a kind of amalgamation of these things, so it would be as realistic as possible. And of course, we had to make various compromises during the actual creation of those videos and combat sequences.
We have made a testing mocap. It was cool, moves were awesome, but we somehow struggled to make a game from it. So we started to look for swordsmen who are also gamers, so we can find together some compromise between the real sword fight and the game. And we found them in Brno.
My name is Robert Waschka. I'm a lecturer in European martial arts and director of the House of Knightly Virtues in Brno. What is the usual procedure in shooting mocap? First of all, we meet with the team and talk about the choreography. And on the basis of the requirements of the game designer, I say how the choreography might look from a realistic historical perspective. And then the designer explains to me why that's out of the question in a game. He explains to me his own concept of how the player experiences the moves, and we'll see his hands in front of him, and we'll be doing things that I tell him are nonsensical. After several hours of very intense physical discussion, in which I grab a sword, the designer grabs a sword, and we have to resuscitate the designer, we arrive at some very good compromise between historical combat realism and something the player can really enjoy and have a powerful experience.
Another thing we discussed with Peter was combat in armor, because there's a lot of ridiculous myths about medieval armors, and we wanted to know how it actually works.
I think you also found out as you were submerging into the topic that it's not true that the armor was that heavy. It was hardened sheet steel. A person had to do somersaults in it, climb on a horse himself, and know how to fall wearing it. And anyone who deals with this knows it's not that easy to hack through this plate armor. You have to use a different technique. You have to aim between the opponent's armor plates through the gaps, which is difficult. And of course, combat in full plate armor looks different and has different destructive techniques than fencing with people without armor, where every cut can knock the opponent out of the fight. And obviously, since you can't deal with it with a sword except if you grab it in a special two-handed grip with both your hands, you can use a short dagger to take the opponent down through the eye opening, or use a mace or some hammer to smash his armour. These are all things that developed in reaction to the development of armour. So on one hand, the protective armour is developing, and on the other, the weapons to overcome it are being perfected.
One of the problems was that we were using the real weapons for the first mocap because we were thinking that the cheap props wouldn't work. But the sword fighters were not able to hit each other with the real weapon, which is strange because we paid them. So we were looking for some other solution and Bob found one.
Co přesně obnáší?
What exactly is involved in our mocap work? We're working with weapons. We're working on a combat system. What you see here are steel weapons we use for trying out techniques from old manuscripts and combat manuals. Then for filming, we use these foam rubber buffers, which means we can carry out the techniques at full speed with no holds barred. We can carry the strikes through the body, even on the head, which you see afterwards in the game, and it's all safe. And this guarantees that the techniques are realistic.
The most important questions was the difference between fencing in a movie or a game and what's fencing like when you actually fight for your life.
Right, well the question is whether it's training fencing, basically sword play where the guys are communicating with their swords, and that's essentially what staged sword fighting is today. Or if it's a genuine fight, one man against another, foe against foe, who want to kill each other. There you want to take the enemy down as quickly as possible without expending energy unnecessarily. It doesn't matter whether it's by hacking, stabbing, hitting, or fouls. Differences? There's a lot. Let's try and name some. For example, theatrical fencing. Actors have very little time to prepare for it. Very few of the blows, if any, land on the body. You work a lot with angle of view. So in theatre, when you see a strike, it always misses the body. The actor has to be safe. He might have to play 300 times a year, so he mustn't get hurt. In the case of stunt sword fighting, on the other hand, the stunt people are athletes. They're boxers. So there's more boxing in it than you get in real sword fighting. Or they're not able to hack hard enough because they don't know how the blade cuts through material. So they strike 2 or 3 times and then maybe kick. Or again, in the case of people who are involved in manuscripts, they have all the techniques very precise as far as the manuscript allows, although it doesn't really take into account that a farmer would fight differently than an aristocrat who could afford to have the manuscript.
It's actually a hard task to get those real combat techniques and put them into the game because you have engine limitations, you need to control it somehow, you have RPG elements. So we needed to find some compromise.
How historically accurate will the combat system be? It will be just historically accurate enough for the game to be playable. That means if you see some technique in the game, in real combat, if carried out correctly, that technique would really strike the person, block an attack, etc. A small sacrifice in realism is that the techniques are not executed at the ideal original fencing distance. Sometimes we move further back than you would in real life and so on. But that is due firstly to the technical constraints of the game and secondly to deepening the immersion in the game, when some sword fighting things would go against that. Frankly, a sword fighter should be essentially lazy. He would achieve the best results in overcoming the opponent while expending the minimum energy. But on the other hand, we want to play a game in which someone attacks you in a frenzy. If you were to feint twice to the right and at an unguarded moment stab him between the eyes, And if you did that every time, it would probably be pretty boring. So, we try from the huge range of options of realistic, historically authentic techniques to put together entertainment for you. We're working with fantastical technical equipment on a perfect looking game, which I, by the way, will be very keen to play once it's ready. As soon as we set the constraints of the action, I wasn't so skeptical, but rather enthusiastic and curious. And my enthusiasm and curiosity is satisfied, because for this day and age, you've made the biggest step forward towards it how it might have looked at the time. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but I'm cheering for you and I think you've done a very fine job.
So as you can see, there is a lot of hard work and thought behind theoretically simple mechanism as swinging the sword. I hope it's already visible in the alpha and upcoming beta, but of course there's still a lot of polishing and tweaking ahead of us, and we plan to add even some new features and weapons. So check out the alpha and beta, and I hope you're gonna love it.
Who are also gamers, and we find them in Brno. Okay? Natáčel jsi to? Já to po druhý neřeknu.
Právě. Jen do místečko si běž. Místečko.